Okay, so, we're getting close to that time of year again, and you've sent in a bunch of articles on it. Daylight saving time seems like you're really trying to get a handle on this whole time change thing.
And you know what? You're definitely not alone.
Yeah.
It's definitely way more complicated than just changing our clocks twice a year, that's for sure.
Yeah, it can get surprisingly complex. So, before we get into all the details, when does daylight saving time actually end this year? Just as a refresher,
Let's see. Here in Illinois, we'll be falling back on November 3rd
November 3rd.
at 2:00 a.m.
Got it. So, November 3rd, mark your calendars, everyone.
Yeah.
But, is that the same across the U.S.?
Well, most of the U.S. observes it,
Okay.
but there are a few exceptions.
Mhm.
Arizona, Hawaii, they actually stick to standard time year-round.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. While we're here changing back and forth, they're just living it up with consistent sunshine.
Right. And it's not just states, is it? Don't some U.S. territories have their own thing going on, too? Yeah, you're right. Some U.S. territories, like Puerto Rico, American Samoa, they also stay on standard time.
Wow, okay. It's amazing how something as, seemingly basic as time can be so different depending on where you are.
Absolutely.
It really is. So, speaking of time, let's talk about the history of daylight saving time. I was reading through the articles you sent, and wow, it's a lot more interesting than you might think.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a really, really interesting history. People often think of it as, a modern inconvenience.
Right.
But the roots actually go back over a century,
Wow.
back to World War I.
World War One.
Yeah,
Seriously. Okay,
yeah.
I had no idea it went back that far. So tell me more. What was happening during World War One?
So in 1918, President Woodrow Wilson, he signed the Standard Time Act. And that actually put DST into effect for the very first time in the U.S.
Okay.
And the main goal was to conserve energy
During the war.
during wartime, yeah. Make the most of the daylight hours, less need for, artificial light.
Makes sense.
Makes total sense.
Yeah, in a wartime context, absolutely. But did it work? Did people actually like it? Did they stick with it after the war ended?
Well, funny enough, the law was actually repealed just a year later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, I guess with the war over, the need for energy conservation wasn't as pressing, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a short-lived experiment.
Okay.
But it came back.
It always comes back.
It always comes back, right?
Yeah.
During World War II,
Oh, of course.
President Roosevelt brought it back. Again, same idea. Energy-saving measure during wartime.
Okay, so two major global conflicts, both pushing for daylight saving time. It makes you wonder if it was really all about just saving energy or if there was something else going on.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
So what happened after World War II? Did it stick around then?
It's funny you should ask that. It didn't immediately become like a nationwide thing after World War II, but what happened was individual states and localities were kind of left to figure out their own time changes.
Oh.
Yeah, you can imagine the chaos.
Oh, I can only imagine. Trying to, travel or anything across state lines.
It was a mess. Total mess.
Yeah.
That chaos actually led to the Uniform Time Act of 1966,
Okay.
which was an attempt to, standardize time across the country.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
But even then, states could still opt out of DST if they wanted to.
Interesting. So this whole back and forth about whether or not to observe it has been going on for decades. It makes you wonder, are we any closer to figuring out if it's a good idea or not?
It's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it actually got even more, I guess, urgent, you could say, in the 1970s.
Oh, the 70s.
Yeah, with the energy crisis.
Okay, hit me with it. What happened with daylight saving time in the 70s?
So President Nixon, he signs a bill, and it puts the entire country on daylight saving time.
Okay.
But here's the catch. Year-round.
Wait, what? Year-round? No more changing back and forth?
No more changing back, no more falling back, no more springing forward, just boom, daylight saving time all the time.
Wow. I bet people had some thoughts on that.
Oh, you better believe it. People had very strong opinions, and it seemed like, for a minute there, it might actually stick. But then, things took kind of a dark turn.
Okay, now I'm really interested. What happened?
This grand experiment, year-round daylight saving time, it actually had some really tragic consequences, unintended consequences, really, especially when it came to children's safety.
Oh no, that's awful. What was the connection there?
Well, studies from back then and even some more recent research, they found a correlation between that abrupt time change in the spring forward, and an increase in traffic accidents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, especially for kids going to school in the dark.
Oh, that makes sense. Darker mornings, everyone's still adjusting to the new time. That's heartbreaking. So I'm guessing this kind of put an end to the whole year-round DST thing.
Yeah, pretty much. The public outcry was huge, and within a year, President Ford reversed it.
Wow.
And we went back to this whole switching back and forth thing
That we're still doing today.
that we're still doing.
So even with what seemed like good intentions, saving energy, it kind of backfired in a major way. This whole history is fascinating, but it also makes you think about how messing with time, even in these seemingly small ways, can have really big and sometimes really unexpected consequences.
Right. And that's why it's so relevant to us today, I think, because we're still kind of grappling with those consequences and trying to figure out what's best. It's easy to think of the time change, like a minor annoyance.
Totally.
But it's actually a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's got to be more than just feeling a little groggy for a few days, right? Like, what's actually happening in our bodies when we mess with daylight saving time?
Our bodies, we run on this roughly 24-hour cycle.
Right.
It's called our circadian rhythm, and it's basically like our internal clock.
Okay.
It regulates everything, from our sleep-wake cycles to hormone release, even our body temperature.
Wow. Okay. So we've got this internal clock trying to keep everything in sync. So where does daylight saving time come in and mess it all up?
Think of it like this. Imagine if you suddenly just shifted the hands on that clock forward by an hour, but you didn't actually change the clock's mechanism.
Okay.
Your body's still hardwired to wake up and fall asleep based on how much daylight it's perceiving.
Right.
But with DST, we're kind of messing with those light cues.
So our bodies are like, hey, it's time to wake up. But the sun's like, not yet.
Exactly. And that disconnect, that can really throw things out of whack.
Yeah.
Studies have actually linked daylight saving time to some pretty serious health problems, actually, from an increased risk of heart attacks and strokes.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah, to mood disorders, even a weakened immune system.
I knew messing with sleep was bad, but I didn't realize it could be that bad. So is it the falling back that's worse for us or the springing forward? I feel like it's the springing forward.
You are correct. Most of the research points to springing forward being the bigger culprit. That sudden loss of an hour of sleep can really throw our bodies off. Remember that 2020 study we talked about earlier? The one that found a 6% increase in fatal traffic accidents?
Yeah, that was scary.
And that's just one study. There's a bunch of evidence that suggests that springing forward is linked to more accidents in general, more workplace injuries, even medical errors.
Oh, wow.
Seems like our collective grogginess has some real consequences.
Yeah, for sure. It makes you wonder if that extra hour of daylight in the evening is actually worth it.
Right, especially as we learn more about sleep.
Yeah.
Exposure to sunlight, especially in the morning, is really, really important for regulating our circadian rhythm.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, you mentioned morning sunlight. How does that work exactly?
So when sunlight hits our eyes, it actually sends a signal to our brains to suppress the production of melatonin, which is the hormone that makes us sleepy.
Got it. Got it.
So more morning sunlight basically equals a more alert and more energized start to the day.
Makes sense, like a natural energy boost.
Exactly. And it's not just about feeling more awake either.
Right.
That warning light, it helps to improve our mood, boost our cognitive function, even regulate our metabolism.
Wow. Okay, so we need more of that.
Right.
But I'm guessing daylight saving time, especially the spring forward part, kind of messes with our ability to get that morning sun right.
You got it.
Yeah.
When we spring forward, we're essentially pushing sunrise later into the morning.
Right.
And a lot of us, with work or school schedules, we just miss out on that crucial morning light exposure.
Yeah, definitely. So we're not only sleep deprived from the time change, but we're also starting our days in a light deficit. No wonder we feel off.
Exactly. And that can have a domino effect throughout the entire day.
Yeah.
Impacts our energy levels, our focus, even our sleep quality the following night.
So we've established that messing with our internal clocks and light cues is probably not the best idea. But it seems like people are still pretty divided on this whole daylight saving time thing.
Totally. It's a really polarizing topic. Some people, they love those longer summer evenings, that feeling that we're getting the most out of the day.
Yeah, I get
And
it.
those are valid feelings.
Oh, yeah. I love the long summer evenings, barbecuing with friends, like evening walks, sunsets. There's something nice about having those extra hours of daylight.
It's true. It's really nice.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, you have a lot of people,
Right.
sleep experts, medical professionals, who are saying that the downsides of DST, especially the health risks, they outweigh the benefits.
I mean, the scientific evidence is really adding up.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any chance we'll see a move away from daylight saving time anytime soon?
Well, you bring up a good point. In 2022, the U.S. Senate actually passed a bill called the Sunshine Protection Act,
Okay.
which would have made daylight saving time permanent across the U.S.
Permanent DST. No more time changes. Wow, what happened? Why didn't it go through?
Well, it passed in the Senate, but then it stalled in the House and eventually just kind of expired. They tried to reintroduce it again in 2023, but it hasn't really gone anywhere.
So much for permanent sunshine.
Right.
Well, the Sunshine Protection Act, I'd love to learn more about that. Like, what were the main arguments for and against making DST permanent?
It's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of why this issue is so complicated. There are really strong arguments on both sides.
So we've got this bill, the Sunshine Protection Act, and it's trying to make DST permanent, but it's kind of stuck. What are the biggest arguments for and against it?
Well, people who support making DST permanent, they often talk about the economic benefits. Like, more daylight in the evenings might lead to increased retail sales.
Oh, interesting. People are out shopping more.
Right, exactly. Or tourism.
Okay, yeah.
People are more likely to go out and do things, spend money when it's light out later.
Makes sense.
They also argue that it could actually reduce traffic accidents and crime rates, although I will say the research on that is a little iffy.
Okay, so more money in the economy, potentially safer streets. Those sound like pretty good arguments. What about the other side? What are people saying against making DST permanent?
The biggest concerns tend to be around health and sleep patterns.
Right, right.
We talked about how, messing with our circadian rhythms can disrupt sleep. And for some people, especially people who are really sensitive to light, permanent DST could make those problems even worse.
Yeah, it would basically be like forcing our bodies to live in a constant state of spring forward, which I've got to say, even that temporary shift can take a while to get used to.
Absolutely. And it's not just about feeling groggy. There's also the concern that permanent DST could actually lead to more cases of seasonal affective disorder,
Oh, wow.
especially in the winter.
Yeah, when the mornings are already so dark.
Exactly.
So basically, more of those winter blues for people.
Potentially.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like there are valid points on both sides, which I guess is kind of why it's so hard to come to a consensus on this whole daylight saving time thing, right?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that time is such a personal thing. We all experience it so differently, and what works well for one person might not work for another. There's also a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of misunderstanding about DST, which doesn't help.
It's true. Everyone's got their own opinions and things they've heard. It's hard to know what's true sometimes. Well, this deep dive has really highlighted just how much there is to consider when it comes to DST. It's not just about personal preference. It really affects our health, the economy, even public safety.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this isn't just a U.S. issue, this time change thing. It's something that people around the world are dealing with.
That's right. We've been so focused on the U.S. side of things, but it's a global conversation, isn't it?
Definitely. And it's interesting to see how different countries are handling it.
Yeah, how so?
Yeah.
What are other countries doing about DST?
Well, you've got countries like most of Europe. They still observe DST, but on a bit of a different schedule than the U.S.
Yeah.
And then you've got others that have tried it out and then just said, nope, not doing it anymore.
Really? Which countries ditched DST?
Russia's a good example.
Yeah.
They used DST for decades, but decided to make standard time permanent back in 2014.
Wow. Okay.
And one of the main reasons they gave was that all the constant time changing was messing with people's health and well-being.
Interesting. It sounds kind of familiar, right? Like what we were just talking about.
Right. It seems like more and more places are realizing that maybe messing with our internal clocks twice a year isn't worth it.
Yeah, for sure. So what about those countries that don't do daylight saving time at all?
Well, there's a lot of them, actually. China, Japan, India,
Mm-hmm.
most of Africa, South America. None of them observe DST.
Wow. So a pretty significant chunk of the world has opted out of the time change game entirely.
It makes you wonder if we're just holding on to this tradition out of habit more than anything else, right?
It really does, especially with so many other countries figuring out different systems and making them work.
Right. It just goes to show that there are other ways of doing things, and maybe what seems like a small change, like adjusting our clocks by an hour, can actually have much bigger consequences than we realize.
Well said. Well, I think we've definitely gone deep on this one. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the history of daylight saving time to its very real impacts on our health and well-being. And, who knows what the future holds. maybe by this time next year, we'll have even more insights to share.
Absolutely. But I think
Ah,
the important thing is we keep having these conversations and learning more about this thing that impacts all of us. Time.
I love that. Well, until next time, deep divers, happy time traveling.